Something is happening to him right now that he does not have language for. Not emotionally. Not in the way he would admit to anyone. He would not call it what it is. He would reach for other words. Busy, distracted, off, tired. He might not reach for any words at all. He might just go quieter than usual, drive a little longer before coming home, sit in front of something he is not watching and feel the particular unease of a man who is being asked a question he has spent a very long time not answering. The question is not about you. That is the part that makes this hard to explain, and the part that most people in your position never hear. The question is about him, about who he actually is when no one is watching. About the distance between the version of himself he has been performing and the version he can feel underneath it, the one that knows things he has not been willing to admit, the one that felt something in the specific direction of you that did not fit inside the life he had already constructed around himself. He is being asked that question right now, not because he chose to sit with it, because something in the sky cracked the floor open, and now the question is rising through the crack whether he is ready for it or not. If that is where things feel like they are right now, if there is something shifting in the field between you that you can sense but cannot quite name, leave a like and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Drop "he cannot run from this one" in the comments. Because what the new moon in Aries conjunct Chiron is doing in the world of the divine masculine right now is not a small thing. And understanding the specific mechanism of it changes how you hold the silence and the distance and everything that feels, from the outside, like nothing is happening. Before we go into what is actually happening in him, there is something I want to put directly in front of you. Because if you are watching this, you have been doing the interior work for long enough that general content is not quite enough anymore. You already understand the broad strokes. What you do not have is the specific map. The one that is built from your birth chart, your soul contract, your particular energetic blueprint, and what the cosmos is currently activating within it. A twin flame union personal reading is exactly that. Built from your name, your date of birth, your time of birth, your place of birth. 4 coordinates that become the foundation of something built only for you. Not a forecast for your sign. Not a general reading about separation. A reading that goes into the specific karmic architecture of your connection, where you actually are in the journey, what is being orchestrated, and the field between you right now, and what your soul contract with this person genuinely says about what comes next. You receive a personal audio reading delivered directly to your inbox, plus a detailed written report you can return to again and again, something to hold on to when the uncertainty gets loud. Your reading will be with you within 48 hours. The link is below. If you've been asking whether this is real, whether the timing means something, whether the universe is actually orchestrating something in the space between you, this reading will answer that from your specific chart, not from generalities. This new moon is not soft. Aries is the first sign. The sign of initiation, of the self in its most undiluted form, of the impulse that moves before thinking catches up with it. A new moon anywhere marks a beginning, a reset, the moment the slate clears and something new is asked to emerge. But a new moon in Aries is a beginning that starts not with planning, not with consideration, not with weighing the options. It starts in the gut, in the chest, in the place where something is true before the mind has had time to talk you out of it. And this one is conjunct Chiron. Chiron is the wounded healer. The placement in your chart and in the collective chart that marks the wound that feels most unhealable. The place where shame lives, the specific territory where a person decided, usually very early, that something about them was fundamentally broken or insufficient or not quite enough to be loved the way they most needed to be loved. In Aries, that wound is the wound of selfhood. The wound that says, I am not allowed to be fully myself. The wound that was formed in the moment someone who mattered communicated, not always in words, that the full force of who you are is too much or not enough or inconvenient or wrong. The wound that produced a man who learned to manage himself, to scale himself back, to present a version that was acceptable to the room rather than true to the interior. That wound is being pressed directly by this new moon, not gently. New moons conjunct Chiron do not press gently. They initiate. They rip the scab off with the energy of something that has waited long enough and will not wait anymore. They force the confrontation between who a person has been performing and who they actually are, and they do it at the level of the gut, not the mind. He cannot think his way out of this one. That is what makes this week different. Here's what has been happening inside him, that he would not know how to name even if you asked him directly. He has been holding two things simultaneously that cannot both be true. The first thing is the narrative he has constructed around why he is where he is, why there is distance, why the connection got put on pause. He has a version of this story that he has told himself often enough that it has become almost solid, almost real, almost something he can hand to himself when the alternative becomes unbearable. He chose this. He is not ready. He has things to figure out. The timing is wrong. This is not what he can hold right now. The reasons vary, but the function is the same. They protect him from a truth that is larger and more demanding than any of those reasons. The second thing is what he actually knows. And what he actually knows is that none of those reasons are the real reason. What he actually knows, in the part of him that cannot be argued out of its knowledge, is that what he felt in the direction of you was real, that the recognition was real, that there was something in the encounter with you that showed him a version of himself he had not previously been able to see, and that he wanted, genuinely and without the performance, to be that person, to live at the level that version of himself was capable of, to stop managing and start actually arriving in his own life. What he actually knows is that the distance is not about the narrative. The distance is about the terror of that arrival. He cannot hold both of these things and function comfortably. The human mind is not built to sustain contradictions without cost. Leon Festinger, the psychologist who first mapped the architecture of cognitive dissonance in the 1950s, showed that when a person holds two cognitions that fundamentally conflict, the mind generates a psychological discomfort so acute that it will do almost anything to resolve it, including changing one of the beliefs, including constructing additional reasons to support the one that is easier to maintain, including reorganizing memory and perception to keep the comfortable version of the story intact. This is what he has been doing, not maliciously, not even consciously. The mind does this below the level of awareness. It selects the evidence that supports the chosen story and minimizes the evidence that challenges it. It builds a case that feels like clear thinking but is actually defensive architecture. It produces a man who sounds, even to himself, like he has thought this through carefully and arrived at a reasonable conclusion, when what he has actually done is protected himself from a conclusion he cannot yet afford to reach. The new moon conjunct Chiron is about to make that protection very expensive. The mechanism is simple even though the experience of it is not. When Chiron gets activated, what activates is not just the wound. What activates is the wound's relationship to the truth the wound was constructed to avoid. The wound and the avoidance strategy are always paired. The Aries Chiron wound that says I am not enough, as I am, is always paired with the avoidance strategy of presenting a version that is curated to feel acceptable. And when the wound gets pressed, both things come up together. The pain and the coping mechanism, and the question of whether the coping mechanism has actually been working or whether it has just been preventing the reckoning. For him, right now, what is surfacing is not a clear thought. It is not a decision or a revelation or a moment of sudden clarity that he could articulate if you called him. It is something more visceral than that. A restlessness in the chest that will not settle. A quality of wrongness in the life he is living that he cannot locate precisely but also cannot dismiss. A specific awareness arriving not as a thought but as a sensation, that he has been somewhere he does not actually belong. Not because he chose wrong, because he stopped choosing at all and started performing. And the thing about the Aries new moon is that it does not permit performing. Aries is the sign of the raw self, the unmediated impulse, the thing you are before you have adjusted it for the audience. A new moon in Aries asks a person to meet themselves at that level, stripped of the management, stripped of the narrative, stripped of the careful construction that has been holding the contradictions apart. He is being asked to meet himself right now. And the self he meets when the performance drops even slightly is the self that knows you, the self that felt the recognition, the self that is holding, somewhere underneath all the cognitive architecture he has built on top of it, an awareness of what he walked away from that is much more honest than the story he has been telling. That self is not comfortable right now. But discomfort, in the language of Chiron, is not a problem. It is a portal. You've been feeling something this week that does not quite correspond to anything happening on the surface. Maybe it arrived as a sudden sharpness of remembering him, not the longing exactly. Something more specific than that, a particular detail, the way he laughed at something, the particular energy of a specific conversation. Not a memory you summoned, but one that arrived without your permission and sat in the foreground of your awareness longer than made sense for where you are in your own process. Maybe it arrived as a dream, or a physical sensation that reminded you of him without any obvious trigger, or a moment of certainty arriving out of nowhere that something is shifting in his world. You are not imagining that. The field between twin flames is not metaphor. It has been studied, obliquely, through the lens of what researchers call interpersonal neurobiology, the study of how nervous systems and close emotional proximity regulate and dysregulate each other across distance and time. Daniel Siegel's work on the relational mind shows that the neural patterns established between people in deep attachment do not simply dissolve when physical proximity ends. They become part of the nervous system's ongoing map of the world. A map that stays active and responsive even when the contact is gone. When something shifts in him, the part of your nervous system that is still mapped to him registers it. Not always consciously, often as exactly the kind of thing you have been experiencing. A sudden surfacing, a specific quality of presence, an interior knowing that does not have a logical source. What you are picking up right now is real. And this is worth sitting with for a moment, because many of the women watching this have spent time questioning whether what they sense in the field is real, or whether it is the product of longing and a mind that is expert at finding what it most wants to find. That doubt is reasonable. It is even healthy. But there's a difference between the feeling that arrives because you are reaching for him, pulling at the connection, hoping for a signal, and the feeling that arrives without being sought. That drops in when you are doing something else entirely. That does not have the particular quality of wishful thinking because it does not always feel like comfort. Sometimes it feels like unease, sometimes like a low hum of something unresolved, sometimes like the specific alertness of knowing, without knowing why, that something has moved in a world you no longer have direct access to. The thing arriving this week does not feel like hope manufactured by longing. It feels like information. He is not okay in the comfortable way he has been performing okay, and that is actually not bad news. Before we go further, I want to name something. You have been in this long enough that you know you are growing. You can feel it, but growth without documentation is invisible over time. You look back and cannot quite measure how far you have actually come. The progress blurs. The doubt moves in. The Twin Flame Journey Tracker and Progress Workbook is the thing that changes that. 39 pages built specifically for this journey. An 8-stage tracker so you know exactly where you are and can mark your movement month by month. A synchronicity log, so the 11:11 moments and the unexpected contacts and the dreams that turned out to be accurate do not disappear into the blur of time. A daily self-love checklist that keeps your focus on you, not just the connection. Weekly reflection prompts that surface patterns you would otherwise miss. Monthly reviews that show you your transformation in writing you can return to. This is not more information. This is the thing that proves to yourself, in your own handwriting across your own pages, that you are actually moving, that the work is actually working, that you are further than you look. The link is below. $11.11 for the complete system. Let us go further into what is actually happening inside him, because this is the part that most content about the divine masculine does not reach. His cognitive dissonance is not about whether he loves you or does not love you. That would be simpler. It would at least be a clear question with a clear answer he could find if he searched honestly enough. The heart knows what it knows. Even the most defended version of him is not sitting with genuine uncertainty about what he felt. What he is uncertain about is what to do with the feeling, whether the feeling makes a demand he is willing to meet, whether answering the demand would require him to dismantle the architecture of a life he has spent considerable effort constructing. His cognitive dissonance is about identity. The two things he cannot hold simultaneously are not, I love her and I left. They are deeper than that. They are, I am the kind of person who knows what matters, and I am not living in the direction of what matters. The dissonance is between his self-concept, the story of who he is, what he values, what kind of person he believes himself to be, and his behavior. His behavior, the continued distance, the absence, the construction of a life that does not include you, does not match the self-concept, and the mind cannot hold that mismatch without generating significant internal noise. Festinger's research found something important about how people handle this kind of identity-level dissonance. The resolution strategies fall into three categories. The person can change the behavior to match the belief. The person can change the belief to match the behavior. Or the person can add new cognitions that reduce the apparent importance of the conflict. He has been doing the third one. He has been adding reasons. The timing is not right. He has things to sort out. She deserves better than what he can offer right now. The connection is real, but the circumstances are not aligned. These are not exactly lies. They contain enough truth that he can offer them to himself without immediately recognizing them as what they are, which is additional thoughts inserted into the gap between the contradictions for the purpose of making the gap feel smaller. The problem is that added cognitions do not resolve dissonance. They contain it, temporarily. And the thing about containing rather than resolving is that the pressure builds. The contradiction does not shrink. It waits. Chiron on this new moon is the moment the containing fails. The pressure does not build further. It breaks open. Not toward you, not necessarily in the form of a reaching out or a revelation he shares with you. Internally, as the specific experience of a man who looks at the life he is in and cannot maintain, even for an hour, the comfortable conviction that this is where he belongs. The Chiron wound in Aries, the wound of selfhood, produces a specific relational pattern that is worth naming directly, because it explains a great deal about what has been confusing in his behavior. The man who carries the wound of I am not allowed to be fully myself learns, early and well, to make himself acceptable through management rather than presence. He becomes skilled at reading what is needed in a room and becoming that. He develops a particular kind of competence at occupying relationships that work for everyone around him, while costing him something he cannot quite name. What it costs him is contact, real contact. The specific experience of being known at the level of the self rather than the performance, of being loved for the version of himself that has not been curated for consumption. You offered him contact, not intentionally, not as a strategy, but as a consequence of the specific quality of connection that exists between twin flames, which bypasses the management layer entirely. He could not perform with you in the way he performs everywhere else. The recognition was too immediate, too specific, too accurate about who he actually was underneath the careful construction. That is why you terrified him. Not because you did anything wrong, because you saw him. And the Chiron wound, the wound that says the real me is the unacceptable version, is activated, not soothed, by being seen. The wound interprets being seen as danger, exposure, the moment before rejection. And the protection against that danger is distance. He created distance not because he did not want the contact, because wanting it felt more dangerous than not having it. This is the core psychological architecture underneath the behavior that has been most confusing and most painful for you to hold. The pushing away is not a statement about his feelings. It is a statement about the wound's relationship to his feelings. He felt something. The wound registered the feeling as dangerous, and the response was withdrawal. The new moon conjunct Chiron is pressing directly on this mechanism. For the first time in a while, the cost of the distance is becoming visible to him in a way the wound cannot easily manage. He cannot sustain the comfortable performance of a man who chose well. Something in the Aries initiation energy is stripping that comfort away and leaving him with the raw question. What are you actually doing, and why, and is the reason real? And that question, once it surfaces at the level of the gut rather than the mind, does not go quietly back to sleep. This is significant because most of the processing he has done around this connection has happened at the level of the mind. He is a person who is skilled with the mind. He can construct a credible argument for almost any position he needs to occupy. He has constructed a credible argument for the position he has been in. It has held because the mind is very good at holding what it is given to hold, at reinforcing the structures it is asked to reinforce, at finding evidence for the conclusions it has already drawn. But the gut does not work that way. The gut does not respond to argument. It does not care about the narrative he has constructed or the reasons he has accumulated or the version of events that makes the most comfortable sense. The gut responds to resonance or the absence of it. And what the gut is registering right now, through the specific pressure of a Chiron activation in Aries, is the absence of resonance between the life he is living and the self that is living it. He can think around that absence. He has been doing so. He cannot feel around it. Not right now. Not with the sky pressing on exactly the place where the performance and the truth have been quietly diverging for longer than he wants to admit. From where you stand, this may look like nothing. That is the most important thing to understand about this particular phase of his process. The internal upheaval does not produce external signals that are easy to read. He may go quieter, not reach out when something in him wanted to. He may seem, if you have any indirect sense of his world, like he is busier or more withdrawn or more committed than before to the life he's been building in your absence. What looks like doubling down is often, at this stage, the last intensification before the container breaks. Festinger noted in his original research that the period of highest dissonance pressure is frequently followed not by gradual change, but by what looked, in retrospect, like a sudden shift, a decision made relatively quickly after a period of apparent stasis. Not because the person had not been processing, but because the processing happened entirely internally until the pressure reached a threshold at which the behavior had to align with the belief or the belief had to permanently collapse. He is in that pressure period. You will not see it clearly from the outside, but you are feeling it. The field knows what the surface does not show. This is the part that requires honesty. What the new moon in Aries is asking of you is not patience in the passive sense, not waiting in the way that requires you to hold yourself in suspension, organized around him, your life arranged in the shape of something that is ready for his return. Aries is not a sign of waiting. It is a sign of becoming. The Chiron wound in Aries is not only his wound, it is a collective wound in this moment. And what the new moon is asking the divine feminine to do with this wound is not to hold it for him, manage it around him, make herself smaller so he can feel less confronted by the fullness of what she is. It is to be so fully herself that the performance of self he has been maintaining becomes, by contrast, unbearable to him, not as strategy, not as a calculation designed to provoke a specific response. As the genuine practice of turning toward your own life with the same initiating energy the Aries sky is sending into everything right now. The rawness of the new moon is not asking you to be soft. It is asking you to be original, to be the first version of yourself, the version that existed before anyone taught you to manage it down to an acceptable size. That version of you is what pulled the recognition in him in the first place. That version is still the one doing the pulling. And here is what is worth sitting with for a moment. The pull is not diminishing over time the way a normal attachment might. That is one of the markers that distinguishes a genuine twin flame connection from a painful but ultimately ordinary attachment. Ordinary attachments fade with distance and time and the accumulation of new experiences. The neural pathways soften. The charge reduces. The person becomes memory rather than presence. This has not done that for him. The distance has not produced fading. It has produced pressure. The not addressing it has not made the knowing quieter. It has made it louder in the specific interior way that suppressed truths always get louder when they are not being spoken. And this new moon, this Chiron activation, this Aries initiation, asking every person to show up as the raw self rather than the managed version, is turning up the volume on something that was already significant. The question the new moon in Aries conjunct Chiron is asking both of you simultaneously, though in very different rooms, is this: are you willing to be who you actually are, regardless of what it costs you to stop performing the safer version? He is being asked that question through upheaval. You are being asked it through invitation. The answers do not have to arrive at the same time. They rarely do, but they are moving right now in the direction of each other. There is a Jungian concept that is worth naming here because it describes something that is often felt but rarely articulated in this kind of content. Jung wrote about what he called the Transcendent Function, the capacity of the psyche to hold a tension between two opposites long enough that a third thing emerges that is not a compromise between the two but something entirely new. Not resolution through one side winning, transformation through the creative tension between both. The transcendent function does not operate on a schedule. It cannot be forced. It cannot be accelerated through effort or strategy or the sustained application of will. It requires only one thing: the willingness to stay inside the tension without collapsing it prematurely by choosing one side and abandoning the other. He has been staying in the tension, not consciously, not in a way he would describe as spiritual practice. That the fact that he has not moved on in the clean way a person who genuinely did not feel the connection would have moved on. The fact that he is still, in some interior way, holding both things simultaneously even as the holding becomes increasingly uncomfortable, means the transcendent function is active. Something is being built, not by either of you individually, in the field between you. And the space that twin flames create through the specific quality of their connection, the space that exists between two people who recognize each other at the soul level and have not yet found the version of themselves capable of sustaining that recognition without the wound intervening. The space between you is not empty. It is full of what is being built. The new moon in Aries marks the moment when the tension peaks before the emergence. Aries is not the sign of completion. It is the sign of initiation. What begins under this sky is not finished under this sky. What is initiated tonight is a process, a forced reckoning in him with the gap between who he is and how he is living, and the gradual, not linear, not always visible movement of that reckoning toward a truth that both of you already know at the level where the wound cannot reach. That truth is this: the recognition was real. The soul contract was real. The specific quality of what existed between you was not constructed by longing or projected by need or manufactured by the particular alchemy of two wounded people meeting at the right moment. It was real in the way that very few things in a lifetime are real, in the way that cannot be untrue even when it is being actively denied. He knows this. Underneath the cognitive architecture, underneath the dissonance management, underneath the wound's insistence that the distance is safer than the contact he knows. The new moon is pressing on the knowing, not to force a particular outcome, not to produce a reunion on a timeline the sky has decided, but to make the not knowing, the performed not knowing, the willful maintenance of comfortable uncertainty, more costly than the truth. At some point, the truth becomes less terrifying than the cost of avoiding it. That point is closer right now than it has been in a long time, not because you did something, not because the strategy worked or the prayers landed or the waiting finally paid off in the way the transactional version of this journey imagines it might, because he is being cracked open by something bigger than both of you. And what lives inside the crack is the same thing that has always lived there. the version of him that knows you, the version that recognized you at the soul level before the wound had a chance to evaluate whether that recognition was safe. That version of him is awake right now. Not fully, not without the confusion and the resistance that comes with being woken into something you have been running from, but awake, present to the question, unable, for this moment, to sustain the comfortable performance of a man who has not already made his most important decision. You feel it because the field carries it. Trust what you are feeling, and turn, with the full force of this Aries new moon, back toward yourself. Not away from the connection, into the version of yourself that has always been the truest anchor of it. The sky is initiating something. Both of you are inside it. Let it move.